Welcome to Tiffany Meyer Tonight. President Trump sending mixed signals over the world's most important oil choke point, backing off a new 20% toll on ships in the Strait of Hormuz just a day after threatening it. This as the U.S. military launching fresh attacks against Iran before reimposing its previously announced blockade of Iranian ports. Yesterday, the president saying the U.S. would reimpose a blockade on Iranian ports and start charging ships fees equal to about 20% of their cargo to help pay for securing the strait. Today, he dropped the toll plan but kept the blockade, saying Gulf kings and emirs called, offering, quote, billions and billions in investment in the United States instead. President Trump now saying he prefers that deal because he doesn't think anyone should be able to charge a fee for the strait. It is not clear whether the investments he is touting are new commitments or money he already announced after an earlier trip to the region. The reversal landing in the middle of a 60-day interim peace deal with Iran that is already in tatters after new U.S. strikes and Iranian attacks on shipping and American allies. Under that deal, Washington lifting an earlier blockade and Iran agreed to keep passage through the strait free of charge for 60 days. But what happens after that is unresolved. Iran, which unleashed new attacks on Bahrain and two United Arab Emirates tankers traveling through the strait, saying it has the right to manage traffic through the strait and potentially charge fees, a claim the U.S. disputes. Oil markets are watching. Brent crude briefly topped about $87 a barrel early Tuesday, then dipped to around $78 after Trump backed off the tolls. The U.S. military saying its earlier strikes in Iran targeting coastal defense systems, missile and drone sites, and maritime capabilities, promising to impose a heavy cost and reduce Iran's ability to hit civilians and commercial shipping. House Speaker Mike Johnson backing the White House.
With regard to the Strait of Hormuz, there is a memo of understanding, but Iran seems to have no interest whatsoever in maintaining any of those provisions. And when they are firing on commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, it's a danger to all freedom-loving people around the world and the economies of almost every nation on the planet. And so the response from America is appropriate. What do you do?
Regional mediators led by Pakistan are still trying to salvage the ceasefire, and separate talks in Rome aiming to keep the Lebanon front quiet. Joining me now with more, John Sitilides, geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors. He's also a senior fellow for global risks at the Center for National Interest. John, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, President Trump's now saying he's foregoing the 20% tax of goods through the Strait of Hormuz, and instead Gulf nations will make big investments in American manufacturing. Why do you think President Trump is taking a different direction on this?
Probably because he had to. I don't know if that was an off-the-cuff remark when he spoke about imposing a 20% tax on all cargo. And we have to be mindful here, Tiffany. It's not just oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf, but also liquefied natural gas, but also petrochemicals and fertilizers upon which the entire world is dependent. And so putting a 20% cargo tax on fertilizers that feed billions of people around the world, on hundreds, if not thousands, of petrochemical and refined products that we in the U.S. and all of our allies use for everyday uses, commercial, industrial, and personal, as well as oil and liquefied natural gas, would have been disastrous for the global economy. But beyond that, let's keep in mind that free and open shipping through international waterways is absolutely foundational to the global economy, that imposing any tolls or fees, as Secretary of State Rubio and Vice President Vance reminded us in recent weeks, is a violation of international maritime law. And it would also set a very, very dangerous precedent, not only for Iran, that's seeking to impose a toll in the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz, but even, say, for communist China that might want to impose a future toll on shipping through the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. So I'm glad President Trump seriously reconsidered that, what I hope to be a tactical error, an off-the-cuff remark, and now we're back to a more solid foundation for how to proceed with Hormuz, as well as for free and open shipping worldwide.
And while the fees are off, the blockade begins today. How big of an impact do you think this will have?
I think it'll have a very significant impact because the Iranian government, or whatever comprises the Iranian government is quickly running out of cash. They were given a brief reprieve under the what I call the Memorandum of Misunderstanding between the U.S. and Iran for several weeks, under which they were allowed to export oil and generate, what is it, $430 to $450 million a day in oil revenue to prop up what is a completely catastrophized economy now. But they don't understand that that was an opening to them to try to come to the negotiating table in good faith. Instead, President Trump seems to indicate that they lied, they cheated at every single opportunity. They agreed to one thing behind closed doors, said completely the opposite at the other, on the other side in the public media sphere. And now we see that it seems the Trump administration believes that there's no way other than to squeeze the Iranian government's revenues and also, of course, to take out whatever remaining ability they have to either attack shipping or to attack Gulf neighbors in the Arabian region.
And digging into that, the Treasury also just seized 130 million in digital assets that was tied to the Central Bank of Iran. What impact do you think this will have?
It'll have additional impacts. I think right now the initial sum is about $130 million in cryptocurrency. That was part of an illegal smuggling network to be able to sell Iranian oil, especially to the Chinese teapot companies, the refineries, where the Chinese government looked the other way. These smaller companies were able to purchase the oil that was sanctioned internationally for years and really allowed the Communist Chinese Party to provide a lifeline to the Iranian government for years, providing tens of billions of dollars, especially under the prior administration, the Biden administration. The Trump administration looked to put an end to that. Again, they didn't take every single sanction that was available to them, but I think right now it's not only a military hammer on the IRGC and the supreme leader and his minions, but also an economic and financial hammer to whatever is left of what we call an Iranian government.
And on that note, the president also expressed confidence on being able to keep the Strait open while blockading Iran. Now, CENTCOM says we have 50,000 U.S. service members deployed in the Middle East, 20 warships and hundreds of aircraft. This is the fourth straight day of strikes aimed at degrading Iranian military capability. Now, this comes, of course, after Iran hit 7 commercial ships, injuring and killing civilians. How is this going to impact the global energy supply chain, and will ships just reroute instead?
I firmly believe that our military definitely has the capacity to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. The question is going to be under what conditions. If there are constant kinetic operations between whatever is left of the Iranian military in the form of rockets and missiles and drones and fast attack boats that even occasionally threaten one ship every few days, the problem, Tiffany, isn't so much whether or not the military can keep the Strait of Hormuz open. It's whether the shippers will move their ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, they don't want to endanger their crews or their ships. And the insurers, Lloyd's of London and other insurers, have to make sure that it's safe enough to keep insurance premiums low. Remember, it was the shippers and the insurers who first closed Hormuz in the first days after the U.S. and Israeli joint attacks on Iran. The Iranians then went ahead and ensured that the strait would remain closed. But until the shippers and the insurers feel that it's safe enough to not just move an occasional ship in and out, but to restore some measure of the flows that were constant of oil, LNG, petrochemicals, and fertilizers up to February 27th, then we're not going to see a normalization of shipping, which is one of the reasons why we see now that many of the countries around the Persian Gulf are beginning to build out critical infrastructure as an alternative to shipping out of the Strait of Hormuz.
And John, President Trump said in an interview today that the strike targets will escalate. Let's play part of that clip.
I'll save the energy targets for last, but ultimately we'll hit energy targets, yeah. But we're going to hit them very hard tonight. We're going to hit them very hard tomorrow night. We're going to hit them very hard the night after. And then next week it gets really bad for them because next week comes the power plants. Next week comes the bridges. We're going to knock out all their power plants. We're going to knock out all their bridges unless they get to the table and negotiate.
Do you believe the Iranians are serious about making a deal?
I think they have no choice.
Why haven't they yet?
I think if I didn't do the way I'm doing, they would never make a deal. They would have never made a deal with Obama. That deal was the worst deal. What they did sign was a worthless piece of paper. What they signed with Obama was a worthless piece of paper that was a road to a nuclear weapon. And what I have is a wall. There will be no nuclear weapon. I'll never sign. And when you listed the three things, by far the most important is they will not have a nuclear weapon.
So it sounds like the goal could still be negotiation. Given how this has played out so far, how do you think this will work out very quickly here?
Tiffany, my concern is twofold right now. One, the degree to which the president intends to carry out not only the attacks on energy infrastructure, right, which deprives the the government, whatever that government is, and we'll talk about that as the second part, of revenues, but also if they take out power plants, then you're really talking about a very devastating impact on the everyday lives of 90 million Iranian citizens. And we don't want them to have to suffer more than they already have for the last 47 years because of the decisions of the governing authorities there. But the second part of this is who to negotiate with. The IRGC, right, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, we're not sure to what extent they actually control the government. The supreme leader, who we don't know if he's even alive, if he's alive or comatose. The Artesh, which is the professional army, and what we keep hearing about is so-called moderates who never seem to be able to be decisive in the end. So I don't know who the Trump administration is even thinking about negotiating with that can actually keep their word if they were to agree to, say, for instance, President Trump's prize here, which is no nuclear weapons for Iran ever. I don't know who signs that document and upholds it if such a document is even achievable.
A lot at stake for sure. John Sitilides, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.